New this morning, President Trump's ongoing efforts to reshape America's trade policy have taken a significant hit after a federal appeals court ruled that most of his sweeping global tariffs are unlawful, a ruling that will not actually take effect until at least October 14th, giving the administration just enough time to prepare a Supreme Court appeal and setting the stage for what could be a defining legal battle over the scope of executive power in trade. For many Americans, this ruling is more than a technical legal matter. It is a reminder of just how deeply tariffs have touched everyday life. When Trump first announced tariffs on imported goods, many of his supporters rallied behind the idea, convinced that it was a bold strategy to level the playing field against foreign nations and bring jobs back to America. At that point, tariffs seemed to have a measure of bipartisan support because the concept of standing up to foreign competitors resonated, but as time passed and the reality of higher prices set in, public opinion shifted dramatically. Polls from late 2024 showed that just after Trump's reelection, 52% of Americans favored tariffs, while 48% opposed. But fast forward to the current moment, and that support has flipped, with a striking 60% of Americans now opposing tariffs compared to only 40% still in favor. What changed is not hard to see. Consumers directly felt the impact every time they went shopping. Tariffs, despite being presented as a clever tool against foreign nations, function essentially as taxes on imports, and those costs quickly passed on to American households. 77% of Americans now say tariffs increase prices in the short term, a number so overwhelming that it's difficult to ignore, while only a tiny sliver, just 4%, say tariffs actually decrease prices. To put that in perspective, that's the kind of percentage you can count on one hand, a statistical blip rather than a serious base of support, even when asked about the long-term impact. Where Trump and his allies often argue that short-term pain will lead to long-term gain, half of Americans still believe tariffs increase prices in the future, while only a quarter say they expect any long-term decrease, which shows just how skeptical the public has become. In politics, perception is everything, and this growing perception that tariffs mean higher costs is bleeding into Trump's approval ratings. Fox News polling even asked people why they thought Trump was doing a bad job, and the number one reason cited was the economy, with tariffs specifically named as the top factor. The connection is clear when people pay more at the grocery store, the gas station, or for basic goods. They link that pain back to the president's policies. That dynamic has played out before in history, where presidents are judged primarily on pocketbook issues, and Trump's situation is no different. Rising prices erode political support quickly. It is no surprise, then, that critics accuse Trump of trying to distract from the backlash with aggressive moves in other areas, such as ramping up ICE raids or emphasizing immigration crackdowns, classic strategies to shift the national conversation when economic news turns sour. Congressman Lloyd Doggett of Texas added fuel to this criticism by pointing out how constituents in his district are dealing with higher prices on everything from coffee to cars, describing tariffs as nothing more than Trump's personal tax on Americans. He argued that as inventory levels run down and more imports face tariffs, the impact will only deepen, particularly around the holidays when families are already financially stretched. For Doggett, the tariffs are not just bad economics but part of a larger pattern of Trump seeking what he called one-man rule, bypassing Congress and acting unilaterally in ways that erode the balance of power and edge closer to authoritarianism. He linked tariffs with other controversial moves, such as cutting congressionally approved funding for international programs or even deploying military forces domestically, all of which, in his view, fit into a broader narrative of unchecked executive authority. That concern has sparked discussions among Democrats about whether Trump's behavior might justify allowing a government shutdown as leverage, though Doggett himself admitted the decision is tough. On one hand, a shutdown risks giving Trump more opportunities to act unilaterally, but on the other hand, failing to resist his actions could be seen as capitulation. The challenge for lawmakers is whether there exists any least worst option when dealing with what they describe as an untrustworthy president. Republicans, meanwhile, have largely chosen to stand by Trump, or at least remain silent, fearing his wrath on social media more than the political consequences of defying him. That fear, Doggett suggested, has left Congress paralyzed, unable to perform its constitutional role of checking presidential overreach. He even suggested that the only issue where some Republicans have dared break ranks involves the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, an odd but telling sign of how little appetite there is to cross Trump on substantive policy. The conversation then shifted to tragedies closer to home, particularly the devastating floods in Texas that killed dozens, including many children. Doggett described attending prayer services for second graders who lost their lives, an experience that left him demanding answers about what went wrong at both the state and federal levels. He accused the Trump administration of gutting critical agencies like the National Weather Service, removing experienced staff under the guise of efficiency, but really, in his view, as part of a larger effort to weaken institutions and centralize power. Despite repeated requests, he said the administration has refused to release data such as radar logs and communication records that could explain why warnings failed to reach camps and communities in time, a refusal that he believes reflects a broader culture of secrecy. For Doggett, transparency should be the minimum after such a catastrophe, but instead the federal government stonewalling fits into the same authoritarian mindset that dismisses accountability. His frustration reflects not only local pain in Texas, but also the national worry that under Trump, federal agencies have been stripped of expertise in ways that make the country less safe in times of crisis. When you step back and connect these threads, the legal challenge to tariffs, the public backlash over rising prices, the political maneuvering to distract from economic pain, and the refusal to provide transparency in tragedies, it becomes clear why critics say this moment is about far more than trade policy. It is about the fundamental question of how much power one president should wield and whether checks and balances still function effectively in practice. The federal appeals court's ruling on tariffs is not just about economic law, it is also about reasserting the constitutional role of Congress in setting trade policy, something presidents of both parties have occasionally tried to stretch, but which Trump has pushed to extremes. The Supreme Court's potential involvement raises the stakes even higher, because a decision there could either rein in presidential authority or embolden it further. For Americans watching this unfold, the legal arguments may feel distant, but the reality of higher grocery bills and shrinking household budgets makes the issue immediate. That is why public opinion has shifted so strongly and why politicians are paying attention. At its core, this debate is about accountability. When leaders promise that tariffs will bring jobs back, but instead deliver higher prices, citizens notice, and when leaders respond to criticism by distracting, deflecting, or silencing transparency, the trust in government erodes even more. Whether you support Trump or oppose him, the tariff saga illustrates the powerful link between economic policy and political legitimacy. The months ahead will test not only the resilience of American institutions, but also the patience of the American public, who ultimately decide through opinion and through the ballot box whether they will continue to tolerate policies that hit them hardest where it counts, in their wallets.